Hello to everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you. I am Thomas Dermine, I am Secretary of State of the Federal Government of Belgium in charge of scientific policy, but also in charge of the recovery plan for Belgium. I would like today to give a message of hope to the WaterstofConferentie. We have in front of us one of the biggest challenges that humanity has ever faced. It is to do the transition to one paradigm of energy based on oil and gas to a carbon-free economy. And actually, my message is that, of course, it's a challenge to do it as fast as we need to do it. But actually, if you look at the history of mankind, we've been able to do this kind of transition already in the past. If you look at the society in the 19th century, we were a rural society, and we switched within a few decades to an economy based on coal. Again, in the 20th century, we did the same kind of transition from a coal-based economy to an economy based on petrol and gas. And so today, the nature of the transition that we need to do is the same kind of transition that we actually already collectively achieved in the past. The additional challenge that we have today is that we have to do it faster than we have done it in the past. If we look at why were we successful in the past in making this kind of transition, actually you would see two critical factors of success. One is that we invested massively in infrastructure when we were to make this kind of transition. If you look at the 19th century, when we were making the transition from rural society to coal-based society, we invested massively in, for example, railway infrastructure or the waterways infrastructure. Again, after the Second World War, when we transitioned to petrol and gas, we did invest massively in infrastructure. We built, for example, the highways. We built the electrical network infrastructure. We built all the pipelines that were required to transport oil and gas. And we built the vast majority of the buildings that still do exist today. So if we are to succeed in the transition to a low carbon economy, let's apply exactly the same recipe. Let's invest in the networks that will be needed for the next energy paradigm based on carbon-free energy. For example, let's invest in the new generation of buildings that can save significant amounts of energy. Let's invest in mobility networks that can achieve a low carbon transport, which is inclusive for everyone. Let's also invest, and it's the topic of the WaterstofConferentie today, let's invest in the networks that will be able to transport hydrogen, which we know will be one part of the solution in the future. If I focus now on hydrogen, it's one of the core elements of our investment strategy in the recovery plan for Belgium. What do we fund in terms of hydrogen in our plan? Basically, to make it simple, we fund three different things. At the entry of the pipeline, in the pipeline infrastructure, and then at the output of the pipeline. So first, at the entry of the pipeline, we invest in capacity to produce green hydrogen. Because nowadays, everybody is talking about hydrogen, but actually the way you generate hydrogen has a radically different impact on CO2 emissions. And we want Belgium to deploy some industrial solutions that are really innovative in terms of not only generating hydrogen, for example with electrolyzers, but also at importing green hydrogen from other parts of the world. That was for the entry level of the pipelines. We also invest in the pipelines. Belgium has a very central location in Europe. Belgium has also the chance to have in its territory a very important port infrastructure in Zeebrugge, in Antwerp. So we have to be at the center of the transport infrastructure of hydrogen in the future. And that's why with the funds we receive from Europe in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, we do fund the first few hundreds kilometers of pipelines dedicated to hydrogen, either by creating new pipelines, but also by retrofitting existing gas infrastructure. We also make sure that we connect the various industrial clusters in Belgium, for example, around the city of Ghent, Antwerp, Luik, Charleroi, and to make sure that we give access to hydrogen for leading industrial players. Because hydrogen, I would say 10 years ago, we believed that the core use of hydrogen would be in mobility application, but in the very short term we see that hydrogen has also a massive potential in helping industrial players to reduce their CO2 footprint by switching to hydrogen as a source of energy. And that's why it's absolutely critical, if we want to maintain an industrial base in Belgium, that we are able to connect them with an hydrogen supply. Then the third thing we finance with our investment plans are first industrial developments, projects on applications of hydrogen. For example, we finance a few projects around mobility, railway mobility, mobility on water transport with ships being fueled on hydrogen, early development on what it would mean if we were one day to make a plane fly on hydrogen. So those kind of research and development projects we do fund also with the recovery plan. All in all, on hydrogen, I believe hydrogen will be to some extent part of the future equation in terms of energy. Today it's still very marginal, it's less than 2%. If we look at the picture in 2050, and of course it's always very difficult to make a projection in the long term, but we see that there is a common estimate that around between 15 and 25% of the energy mix will be dedicated to hydrogen. And Belgium has a very central place in Europe for the network, but Belgium also as a front runner on industrial application needs to be at the forefront of this evolution, and that's why we start to invest today to try to break the chicken and the egg dilemma that we face today. And I believe that we have to invest hand in hand, the private sector and the public sector, to try to initiate this dynamic. And that's why I believe that the conference that you have at the WaterstofConferentie is very important to start a dialogue and to make sure that the interests of the public sector and the private sector are always aligned on this course ahead. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very fruitful exchanges today.